with this, I would like to come to the next session, and I'm delighted that I first have somebody in the studio with me, because Martina Vaselli, who's our head of the sustainability team, is joining us, and actually it was her and the team who did all the work, let's be honest. And then more importantly, we've got Mardi McBrien with us, who's the Director for Strategic Alliances at the IFRS Foundation, and is really working on the ISSB piece. And you know, if there was one word that's been used nearly as much as transition in the course of the morning, it's been the ISSB. And it's great to have you with us, Mardi. Are you there? Yes, good. Perfect. Maybe we start. Shall I pass over to you to kind of start on the interview?
Thank you, Nick, and good morning again, everybody. Hi, Mardi. Thank you for joining us today. Our fireside chat was really to give you the possibility to give us an overview on the standards, the work of the ISSB, which are the high-level principles that you are kind of following through the developments of these standards in light of the public consultation, which will be open until the end of this month. So I will pass over to you for an overview of all of this. I think we have a few issues hearing you.
Bear with us a moment. Mardi, you can hear us, can't you? But we can't hear you at the moment. And nothing is perfect in this world, so just bear with us for a moment. We've all been there in the last 2 years, 2.5 years.
2.5 now.
No, we're still kind of, our technical team is working it out, so bear with us for a moment. I think Mardi's dialing back in. Yeah, Mardi's reconnecting. Bear with us for a moment. But it'll be interesting to hear what she has to say, both on the consultation but what we really want to focus on in the discussion is a little bit the commonalities and differences, because Patrick already, interestingly enough, highlighted the importance of convergence. And in the past, a lot of people have made more out of the differences between the ISSB and EFRAG, but I think really in reality there's more commonality. I see Mardi's back. Can you hear us now? We see you? But we still seem to have an audio problem.
No.
Mardi, can you hear?
I can.
Okay,
excellent,
great.
Excellent. Perfect, good. We've got you with us. So as Martina says, maybe you just introduce a little bit where you are in the work stream, some of the things around the consultation, and then we can kind of go into a bit of a Q&A.
I'd love that. So where we are at the moment is that, as we said, we have a consultation out for the next, just a few weeks left. We've been working quite hard. We have 2 exposure drafts out at the Standards Board. We have the S1, so like IAS1 for those familiar, it's our general requirement standard that can apply to all sustainability information, as well as our climate standard S2, very specific to climate change, and also very heavily, as we heard from the speaker before, built off the TCFD. We do take it a bit further in places, but very much trying to create that global, consistent, comparable baseline for reporters globally. So on that, so the board has been very, very busy. We now have a core board, which is exciting. We're meeting again in a few weeks as a board. The board will start deliberating on some of these changes we're hearing. And we also at the moment have a staff paper out on a digital taxonomy, because our commitment when we were launched at COP26 was that we would have not just the standards out, but a digital taxonomy to sit alongside that. And so we have a staff paper out at the moment that's also asking for feedback if we've got the approach right, so that we can go as fast as we can to digitize the standards once they're out at the end of this year. So I've alluded to the end of the year. So we have the consultation feedback that we're hoping to get in by the end of this month. We've had a huge response of questions come in, so we're hoping it'll be great. If you haven't responded yet and you're going to, please do give us. Don't say yes and no. Give us as much, much why yes, why no, what would you do differently, and examples to, help us make these standards as robust as we can. The board, as I said, a meeting in 2 weeks. It's public. You can join online. The links and the papers will be there later this week. The board will then start to process the feedback across the summer and later this year. And we're hoping to have the first two standards out, final version of the first two standards out by the end of this year. Now, people say, oh, you don't cover everything, you just cover climate. I just want to address that before handing back. The standards, the S1 standard can cover all sustainability information. We will go out and create other thematic standards, but we'll do that once we've asked the market. So moving forward later this year, we expect late Q3, early Q4, once the board has had time to deliberate and meet and come up with its agenda. They will publish an agenda consultation, much like the IASB does, to seek views from the market about what we should be working on next. The board will also be spending the next few months thinking about how it's going to internationalise the ISSB sector standards, which very much tie in alongside the thematic pillars into the general requirements to support reporters preparing that consistent decision useful information.
Thank you, Mardi. And I think reminding everybody of the timeline is very important, especially in light, as you said, of the fact that the public consultation on these first two sets is closing in 3 weeks. So thank you for this. And just to pick up on a couple of points that you mentioned, you touched upon the TCFD alignment. You touched upon let's say the climate standard that is under consultation, and the potential other standards that will come out later. There are, I think, two principles. One, especially one which we get a lot of questions on, and this is the principle of materiality. So it would be good if you could just elaborate a bit more on what you mean by materiality. How would companies proceed with a materiality assessment? Because in my view, when you do a judgment of materiality on financial information, it is a bit different than doing it for sustainability ones. So over to you.
Sure. So I think the first thing to be very, to think about here is we're not asking you to boil the ocean. We're not asking you to do everything, assess everything. We very much use our sister, the ISSB's definition of materiality, and that's assessed in the context of the general purpose financial reporting taken as a whole. So standing back, having a look at the big picture assessment, if you like, and effectively decide if the piece of information about climate or human rights or indigenous related issues, is that the bit of information you're considering around that, could that reasonably be expected to influence decisions in the context of the package of information you're presenting? And that's how, very much like our sister at the ISSB, we want people to stand back and think about reporting and materiality in the context of our standards. What we are doing with our standards is we really want to use this moment to help preparers start to tell one consistent story. And so we've asked for sustainability information to be reported at the same time and connected where relevant to the report and accounts or main communication to investors. And that's really important because currently now we're seeing sustainability reports up to 3 or 4 months later, and they don't often align with the story being told in the annual report and accounts. So we're really hoping to bring these two much more closer together.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Maybe, Nick, I pass over to you on more the commonalities.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Martina already raised the point about materiality, but ultimately the elephant in the room is single versus double materiality. We had this discussion that the ISSB focuses on investors' decisions, so one way, but the EU goes both ways and looks at the company's impact on the society, on the economy, and therefore the two standards are not fully aligned. And Eric, I don't know whether you heard him just now, I loved his comparison. If everybody is in a race, but is running on different tracks, you don't know who's won, because there's no comparability. And if I look at the consultation, your consultation paper, there are things in there from, as you say, environmental aspects are in there, value chain aspects are in there. You call it slightly differently, but there are some do no significant harm elements in there, so unintended consequences in other sectors. Actually, and scope 3 emissions, importantly. So how do you see this issue of single versus double materiality?
So we are. First of all, I'll just put up front and say that one, I love the analogy of the Olympic and the running track and the interoperability from the speaker before. I thought that was really fantastic and almost hit the nail directly on the head. To start with, on this, we do have a jurisdictional working group that we set up at the foundation to work with the US, the EU, and others, the UK, Japan, others that currently have open processes, either on standards development that very linked, or need to be interoperable with the global baseline, or with jurisdictions that currently have processes in place about how they would like to adopt these standards to make sure they can fit. That jurisdictional working group is underway both at a group level and a bilateral level to work on driving as much alignment as we can from the beginning. Much harder to do it later on, as we all know. We do cover impact where it can impact the financial statements in the standards. Again, we very much see that the work of Europe as a building block. So again, the enterprise value across the bottom with the impact materiality built on top. Information needs to move, and we need to drive as much consistency in definitions and approaches as we possibly can. One way we are doing that across into, if you like to say, the wider stakeholder materiality view or impact on the world view, is that we're working closely with the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, to drive as much alignment between our standards, because their standards cover a lot of that space and are globally used and are heavily integrated into the EU standards at the moment. So working to drive alignment now there will really help with interoperability more globally as well between the different spheres of materiality. Lower the cost of reporting for companies, more consistent information, and also support the digital tagging as well.
Thank you, Mardi. I think you mentioned the fact that your consultation and your work is really meant to help companies, and you don't want to kind of overburden them, and that's the step that's the set of steps that you're taking in order not to develop what will be the IFRS sustainability standards. I think that it's important in this sense to touch upon what companies are facing in terms of operational challenges when it comes to availability of data, estimates. So in this sense, my question is, how do you see these estimates being reasonably acceptable when it comes to complying with these standards? How will be this phased out as more data become available during the time?
So I think to start with, what we're asking for as part of the climate standard as a starting point, a lot of large companies have this data already. A lot of this data already, particularly across Europe. A lot of companies have been reporting similar data to CDP, up to 12 and 15 years. So, and I think the other thing with some of these standards, if you were to take the ISSB sector standards, which I've done recently here at the foundation about how we're going to report against those, we actually determined we had a lot of the information already internally. We just weren't collecting it and thinking about it as sustainability information as business as usual, which is where we hope this agenda can go to in the future. So there is information already there. I think we also need to be able to, people need to be able to communicate the direction of travel. Others won't be as far advanced. And as part of this, the board in its first several meetings will be looking at sort of a glide path to adoption of the standards, particularly for SMEs, unlisted companies and companies within, smaller companies that need to comply through supply chains. So the board is very aware of some of the challenges around data availability and are looking at how we can go about longer timelines to building compliance, for example, as I said, glide path to adoption, being longer than what they may traditionally be for accounting standards.
Maybe follow up, and I asked Patrick earlier the same thing. By the way, Patrick was very complimentary and said that there's a much closer cooperation now between you and EFRAG in aligning that at least what they call E1, the environmental standards, are aligned with your S2, effectively the the environmental and green ones. And I think that that's good, because ultimately we'll have a panel in a moment on what we call the CSRD, the Corporate Governance Disclosure Framework. It's all about what we in Europe call equivalence, deference, whatever you want to use, about mutual recognition in one form or another of different regimes and not multiple reporting. But one challenge is you focus, as does EFRAG, not just on the risks, you also focus on the opportunities. And I think that's very positive, because there are opportunities. But opportunities are much harder to measure. And you want to avoid greenwashing, but ultimately you're asking companies to make optimistic assessments about their future, the impact of their future strategic thinking. How do we do this? And secondly, to what extent are companies comfortable to do this? Because they're also exposing part of their strategy, part of their investment strategy. So if you put all these together in a sector, you can see, you can kind of map against each other, maybe some commercial secrets. So how do you look at forward-looking opportunities in an accounting context?
So this again is a question that's been coming up a lot in terms of responding to the exposure drafts. We are working to develop guidance, first of all, to help be able to communicate this, help inform preparers about how they should go about thinking about forward-looking opportunities. We also suggest that if these standards are mandatory, then that will level the playing field for that sector or industry. So that will again help to make the similar sort of information available. I think talking with investors is also a good way of informing that, and working with your auditors on that as well. So we're not. We understand that it's about indicating the direction of travel as comprehensively as can be, without disclosing those that commercially sensitive information. And it is a question that's come up. It's a question that's come up with TCFD for the last 5 years as well. And legal teams are working about how to do that. For example, disclosing scope 3 scenarios, and you get great examples from companies like BHP Billiton on that.
Thank you. Maybe last one, which is, I think, again, coming back to international consistency. You've made the point already, but what I think is interesting about the ISSB, you're basing yourself on TCFD disclosure frameworks. You're basing yourselves on existing standards as much as possible. How can I put it? How far can you go with that? So who are you bringing in, and how are you consulting with some of these other parties? I think it's very interesting. And maybe a follow-up last question is, where do you see the standard going beyond the climate piece? You've already alluded that the environmental piece can be built in, but at some stage we come to slightly more difficult issues. In Europe, we had a conversation about labor rights, for example, and social rights, which might be okay between the EU and US in certain jurisdictions, but might be more difficult with some other countries across the world, or some of the governance elements equally.
So very good question. So in terms of the other work, we're building off the existing standards that were focused on enterprise value. So and they covered the majority of the sustainability topics, if you like. So the ISSB is built directly off the Climate Disclosure Standards Board standards, which were investor-based, principles-based. The TCFD was built from the CDSB framework. And that now covers all social information when we consolidated into the IFRS. So the IFRS acquired that property when they consolidated us in the end of January. They, through the consolidation of the Value Reporting Foundation at the end of this month, they will acquire the IP of the SASB standards as well as the Integrated Reporting Framework. So they're included in these. So they go quite a long way to cover a lot of sustainability information. They're built into this as well as not just the TCFD, which we hope in due course, if we do the right thing, will hand its reins over to us. And it also includes the WEF IBC metric. So that again has been built in, and staff from both the WEF teams and the TCFD teams are present here in the IFRS head office working on the development of these standards to make sure we get as much of the cross-pollination and learning and make sure these things are built in, as well as all the past legacy of all the work and thinking we've done as well is available to be built in, because that allows us to move faster with some of that market field testing already done and learning to help make sure that this global baseline is as robust and actionable, practical as it possibly can. Beyond climate, I alluded to this earlier, so the S1 does cover all issues, but we, again, like IASB, our sister, we do ask the market. So we don't know what will come after climate until you tell us. And so, as I said, that consultation will go out. They have made no assessments. There has been no core board meetings held yet, so no decisions have been made about what will come next. I would suggest to watch this space and look out for the consultation. But you raised a very valid point about, oh, human rights people might not adopt that in some jurisdictions. That is the beauty of the building blocks approach, is that countries may, for example, around the world decide to take S2 first because they can bolt that into where they had TCFD already in regulation and have to do more work to integrate S1 and other standards in the future. But we're seeing a real, but this is again, one that we're seeing lots of different ideas about how countries will adopt it. One of the early deliberations of the board will be how they go about considering what full adoption of IFRS sustainability standards looks like, in the way that they previously decided what full adoption of IASB standards look like.
Mardi, thanks so much for being with us. And I think we will see, maybe we can do one of these again sometime in the autumn or later in the year. You'll be incredibly busy, but I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the consultation response and how things progress. It's also nice to see that the board is so transparent the way it's meeting, and we will certainly be listening in. We'll be a fly on the wall, a virtual fly on the wall. So that'll be very good. I think that's a very important process. Thanks for being with us. I know it's an incredibly busy time for you, so we really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And with that, also thank you to Martina, who will join us again in a while to talk to Mauricio on the assurance process. But